I could not read Kay and Mallison's volumes in England, but I did so in South Africa as I had made a point of reading them at the first opportunity. Thus, with just a little leaven of hope mixed with my despair, I landed at Bombay from SS. Assam. The sea was rough in the harbor, and I had to reach the quay in a launch. Chapter 26. Rachenbai. I said in the last chapter that the sea was rough in Bombay harbor, not an unusual thing in the Arabian Sea in June and July. It had been choppy all the way from Aden. Almost every passenger was sick. I alone was in perfect form, staying on deck to see the stormy surge, and enjoying the splash of the waves. At breakfast there would be just 1 or 2 people besides myself, eating their oatmeal porridge from plates carefully held in their laps, lest the porridge itself find its place there. The outer storm was to me a symbol of the inner. But even as the former left me unperturbed, I think I can say the same thing about the latter. There was the trouble with the caste that was to confront me. I have already adverted to my helplessness in starting on my profession. And then, as I was a reformer, I was taxing myself as to how best to begin certain reforms. But there was even more in store for me than I knew. My elder brother had come to meet me at the dock. He had already made the acquaintance of Dr. Mehta and his elder brother, and as Dr. Mehta insisted on putting me up at his house, we went there. Thus the acquaintance begun in England continued in India and ripened into a permanent friendship between the two families. I was pining to see my mother. I did not know that she was no more in the flesh to receive me back into her bosom. The sad news was now given me, and I underwent the usual ablution. My brother had kept me ignorant of her death, which took place whilst I was still in England. He wanted to spare me the blow in a foreign land. The news, however, was none the less a severe shock to me. But I must not dwell upon it. My grief was even greater than over my father's death. Most of my cherished hopes were shattered. But I remember that I did not give myself up to any wild expression of grief. I could even check the tears, and took to life just as though nothing had happened. Dr. Mehta introduced me to several friends, one of them being his brother Sri Ravishankar Jajivan, with whom there grew up a lifelong friendship. But the introduction that I need particularly take note of was the one to the poet Raichand or Rajchandra, the son-in-law of an elder brother of Dr. Mehta, and partner of the firm of jewelers conducted in the name of Ravishankar Jajivan. He was not above 25 then, but my first meeting with him convinced me that he was a man of great character and learning. He was also known as Shadavadani, one having the faculty of remembering or attending to 100 things simultaneously, and Dr. Mehta recommended me to see some of his memory feats. I exhausted my vocabulary of all the European tongues I knew, and asked the poet to repeat the words. He did so in the precise order in which I had given them. I envied his gift without, however, coming under its spell. The thing that did cast its spell over me I came to know afterwards. This was his wide knowledge of the scriptures, his spotless character, and his burning passion for self-realization. I saw later that this last was the only thing for which he lived. The following lines of Muktanand were always on his lips and engraved on the tablets of his heart. I shall think myself blessed only when I see him in every one of my daily acts. Verily he is the thread which supports Muktanand's life. Rachenbai's commercial transactions covered hundreds of thousands. He was a connoisseur of pearls and diamonds. No knotty business problem was too difficult for him. But all these things were not the center round which his life revolved. That center was the passion to see God face to face. Amongst the things on his business table there were invariably to be found some religious book and his diary. The moment he finished his business he opened the religious book or the diary. Much of his published writings is a reproduction from this diary. The man who, immediately on finishing his talk about weighty business transaction, began to write about the hidden things of the spirit could evidently not be a businessman at all, but a real seeker after truth. And I saw him thus absorbed in godly pursuits in the midst of business, not once or twice, but very often. I never saw him lose his state of equipoise. There was no business or other selfish tie that bound him to me, and yet I enjoyed the closest association with him. I was but a briefless barrister then, and yet whenever I saw him he would engage me in conversation of a seriously religious nature. Though I was then groping and could not be said to have any serious interest in religious discussion, still I found his talk of absorbing interest. I have since met many a religious leader or teacher. I have tried to meet the heads of various faiths, and I must say that no one else has ever made on me the impression that Rachenbai did. His words went straight home to me. His intellect compelled as great a regard from me as his moral earnestness, and deep down in me was the conviction that he would never willingly lead me astray and would always confide to me his innermost thoughts. In my moments of spiritual crisis, therefore, he was my refuge. And yet in spite of this regard for him I could not enthrone him in my heart as my guru. The throne has remained vacant and my search still continues. I believe in the Hindu theory of guru and his importance in spiritual realization. I think there is a great deal of truth in the doctrine that true knowledge is impossible without a guru. An imperfect teacher may be tolerable in mundane matters, but not in spiritual matters. Only a perfect gnani deserves to be enthroned as guru. There must, therefore, be ceaseless striving after perfection. For one gets the guru that one deserves. Infinite striving after perfection is one's right. It is its own reward. The rest is in the hands of God. Thus, though I could not place Rachenbai on the throne of my heart as guru, we shall see how he was, on many occasions, my guide and helper. 3 moderns have left a deep impress on my life, and captivated me: Rachenbai by his living contact, Tolstoy by his book, The Kingdom of God is Within You, and Ruskin by his Unto This Last. But of these more in their proper place. Chapter 27. How I began life. My elder brother had built high hopes on me. The desire for wealth and name and fame was great in him. He had a big heart, generous to a fault. This, combined with his simple nature, had attracted to him many friends, and through them he expected to get me briefs. He had also assumed that I should have a swinging practice and had, in that expectation, allowed the household expenses to become top-heavy. He had also left no stone unturned in preparing the field for my practice. The storm in my caste over my foreign voyage was still brewing. It had divided the caste into 2 camps, one of which immediately readmitted me, while the other was bent on keeping me out. 2. Please the former, my brother took me to Nasik before going to Rajkot, gave me a bath in the sacred river and, on reaching Rajkot, gave a caste dinner. I did not like all this. But my brother's love for me was boundless, and my devotion to him was in proportion to it, and so I mechanically acted as he wished, taking his will to be law. The trouble about readmission to the caste was thus practically over. I never tried to seek admission to the section that had refused it, nor did I feel even mental resentment against any of the headmen of that section. Some of these regarded me with dislike, but I scrupulously avoided hurting their feelings. I fully respected the caste regulations about excommunication. According to these, none of my relations, including my father-in-law and mother-in-law, and even my sister and brother-in-law, could entertain me, and I would not so much as drink water at their houses. They were prepared secretly to evade the prohibition, but it went against the grain with me to do a thing in secret that I would not do in public. The result of my scrupulous conduct was that I never had occasion to be troubled by the caste. Nay, I have experienced nothing but affection and generosity from the general body of the section. That still regards me as excommunicated. They have even helped me in my work, without ever expecting me to do anything for the caste. It is my conviction that all these good things are due to my non-resistance. Had I agitated for being admitted to the caste, had I attempted to divide it into more camps, had I provoked the caste men, they would surely have retaliated, and instead of steering clear of the storm, I should on arrival from England, have found myself in a whirlpool of agitation, and perhaps a party to dissimulation. My relations with my wife were still not as I desired. Even my stay in England had not cured me of jealousy. I continued my squeamishness and suspiciousness in respect of every little thing, and hence all my cherished desires remained unfulfilled. I had decided that my wife should learn reading and writing and that I should help her in her studies, but my lust came in the way and she had to suffer for my own shortcoming. Once I went the length of sending her away to her father's house, and consented to receive her back only after I had made her thoroughly miserable. I saw later that all this was pure folly on my part. I had planned reform in the education of children, my brother had children, and my own child, which I had left at home when I went to England, was now a boy of nearly 4. It was my desire to teach these little ones physical exercise and make them hardy, and also to give them the benefit of my personal guidance. In this I had my brother's support, and I succeeded in my efforts more or less. I very much liked the company of children, and the habit of playing and joking with them has stayed with me till today. I have ever since thought that I should make a good teacher of children. The necessity for food reform was obvious. Tea and coffee had already found their place in the house. My brother had thought it fit to keep some sort of English atmosphere ready for me on my return, and to that end, crockery and such other things, which used to be kept in the house only for special occasions, were now in general use. My reforms put the finishing touch I introduced oatmeal porridge, and cocoa was to replace tea and coffee. But in truth it became an addition to tea and coffee. Boots and shoes were already there. I completed the Europeanization by adding the European dress. Expenses thus went up. New things were added every day. We had succeeded in tying a white elephant at our door. But how was the wherewithal to be found? To start practice in Rajkot would have meant sure ridicule. I had hardly the knowledge of a qualified vakil, and yet I expected to be paid 10 times his fee. No client would be fool enough to engage me. And even if such a one was to be found, should I add arrogance and fraud to my ignorance, and increase the burden of debt I owed to the world? Friends advised me to go to Bombay for some time in order to gain experience of the High Court, to study Indian law and to try get what briefs I could. I took up the suggestion and went. In Bombay I started a household with a cook as incompetent as myself. He was a Brahmin. I did not treat him as a servant but as a member of the household. He would pour water over himself, but never wash. His dhoti was dirty, as also his sacred thread, and he was completely innocent of the scriptures. But how was I to get a better cook? Well, Ravi Shankar, for that was his name, I would ask him, you may not know cooking, but surely you must know your sanya, daily worship, etc. Sanya #, sir. The plow is our sanya and the spade our daily ritual. That is the type of Brahmin I am. I must live on your mercy. Otherwise agriculture is of course there for me. So I had to be Ravi Shankar's teacher. Time I had enough. I began to do half the cooking myself, and introduced the English experiments in vegetarian cookery. I invested in a stove, and with Ravi Shankar began to run the kitchen. I had no scruples about interdining. Ravi Shankar too came to have none, and so we went on merrily together. There was only one obstacle. Ravi Shankar had sworn to remain dirty and to keep the food unclean. But it was impossible for me to get along in Bombay for more than 4 or 5 months, there being no income to square with the ever-increasing expenditure. This was how I began life. I found the barrister's profession a bad job, much show and little knowledge. I felt a crushing sense of my responsibility. Chapter 28. The first case. While in Bombay, I began, on the one hand, my study of Indian law and, on the other, my experiments in dietetics, in which Mahatma Gandhi, a friend, joined me. My brother, for his part, was trying his best to get me briefs. The study of Indian law was a tedious business. The Civil Procedure Code I could in no way get on with. Not so, however, with the Evidence Act. Mahatma Gandhi was reading for the solicitors' examination and would tell me all sorts of stories about barristers and vakils. Sir Farazeshah's ability, he would say, lies in his profound knowledge of law. He has the Evidence Act by heart, and knows all the cases on the 32nd section. Badruddin Tyabji's wonderful power of argument inspires the judges with awe. The stories of stalwarts such as these would unnerve me. It is not unusual, he would add, for a barrister to vegetate for 5 or 7 years. That's why I have signed the articles for solicitorship. You should count yourself lucky if you can paddle your own canoe in 3 years' time. Expenses were mounting up every month. To have a barrister's board outside the house, whilst still preparing for the barrister's profession inside, was a thing to which I could not reconcile myself. Hence I could not give undivided attention to my studies. I developed some liking for the Evidence Act and read Maine's Hindu law with deep interest, but I had not the courage to conduct a case. I was helpless beyond words, even as the bride come fresh to her father-in-law's house. About this time, I took up the case of one Mama Bai. It was a small cause. You will have to pay some commission to the tout, I was told. I emphatically declined. But even that great criminal lawyer Mr. So-and-so, who makes 3,000 to 4,000 a month, paye commission. I do not need to emulate him, I rejoined. I should be content with 300 rupees a month. Father did not get more. But those days are gone. Expenses in Bombay have gone up frightfully. You must be businesslike. I was adamant. I gave no commission, but got Mamabai's case all the same. It was an easy case. I charged 30 rupees for my fees. The case was no likely to last longer than a day. This was my debut in the small causes court. I appeared for the defendant and had thus to cross-examine the plaintiff's witnesses. I stood up, but my heart sank into my boots. My head was reeling and I felt as though the whole court was doing likewise. I could think of no question to ask. The judge must have laughed, and the vakils no doubt enjoyed the spectacle. But I was past seeing anything. I sat down and told the agent that I could not conduct the case, that he had better engage Patel and have the fee back from me. Mr. Patel was duly engaged for 51 rupees. To him, of course, the case was child's play. I hastened from the court, not knowing whether my client won or lost her case, but I was ashamed of myself, and decided not to take up any more cases until I had courage enough to conduct them. Indeed, I did not go to court again until I went to South Africa. There was no virtue in my decision. I had simply made a virtue of necessity. There would be no one so foolish as to entrust his case to me, only to lose it. But there was another case in store for me at Bombay. It was a memorial to be drafted. A poor Mussulman's land was confiscated in Porbandar. He approached me as the worthy son of a worthy father. His case appeared to be weak, but I consented to draft a memorial for him, the cost of printing to be borne by him. I drafted it and read it out to friends. They approved of it, and that to some extent made me feel confident that I was qualified enough to draft a memorial, as indeed I really was. My business could flourish if I drafted memorials without any fees. But that would be no grist to the mill. So I thought I might take up a teacher's job. My knowledge of English was good enough, and I should have loved to teach English to matriculation boys in some school. In this way I could have met part at least of the expenses. I came across an advertisement in the papers, wanted an English teacher to teach 1 hour daily. Salary 75 rupees. The advertisement was from a famous high school. I applied for the post and was called for an interview. I went there in high spirits, but when the principal found that I was not a graduate, he regretfully refused me. But I have passed the London matriculation with Latin as my second language. True, but we want a graduate. There was no help for it. I wrung my hands in despair. My brother also felt much worried. We both came to the conclusion that it was no use spending more time in Bombay. I should settle in Rajkot, where my brother, himself a petty pleader, could give me some work in the shape of drafting applications and memorials. And then, as there was already a household at Rajkot, the breaking up of the one at Bombay meant a considerable saving. I liked the suggestion. My little establishment was thus closed after a stay of 6 months in Bombay. I used to attend High Court daily whilst in Bombay, but I cannot say that I learned anything there. I had not sufficient knowledge to learn much. Often I could not follow the case and dozed off. There were others also who kept me company in this, and thus lightened my load of shame. After a time, I even lost the sense of shame, as I learned to think that it was fashionable to doze in the High Court. If the present generation has also its briefless barristers like me in Bombay, I would commend them a little practical precept about living. Although I lived in Gurgaon, I hardly ever tow a carriage or a tramcar. I had made it a rule to walk to the High Court. It took me quite 45 minutes, and of course I invariably returned home on foot. I had inured myself to the heat of the sun. This walk to and from the court saved a fair amount of money, and when many of my friends in Bombay used to fall ill, I do not remember having once had an illness. Even when I began to earn money, I kept up the practice of walking to and from the office, and I am still reaping the benefits of that practice. Chapter 29. The First Shock. Disappointed, I left Bombay and went to Rajkot, where I set up my own office. Here I got along moderately well. Drafting applications and memorials brought me in, on an average, 300 rupees a month. For this work I had to thank influence rather than my own ability, for my brother's partner had a settled practice. All applications etc. which were, really or to his mind of an important character, he sent to big barristers. To my lot fell the applications to be drafted on behalf of his poor clients. I must confess that here I had to compromise the principle of giving no commission, which in Bombay I had so scrupulously observed. I was told that conditions in the two cases were different, that whilst in Bombay commissions had to be paid to touts, here they had to be paid to vakils who briefed you, and that here as in Bombay all barristers, without exception, paid a percentage of their fees as commission. The argument of my brother was, for me, unanswerable. You see, said he, that I am in partnership with another vakil. I shall always be inclined to make over to you all our cases with which you can possibly deal, and if you refuse to pay a commission to my partner, you are sure to embarrass me. As you and I have a joint establishment, your fee comes to our common purse, and I automatically get a share. But what about my partner? Supposing he gave the same case to some other barrister, he would certainly get his commission from him. I was taken in by this plea, and felt that, if I was to practice as a barrister, I could not press my principle regarding commissions in such cases. That is how I argued with myself, or to put it bluntly, how I deceived myself. Let me add, however, that I do not remember ever to have given a commission in respect of any other case. Though I thus began to make both ends meet, I got the first shock of my life about this time. I had heard what a British officer was like, but up to now had never been face to face with one. My brother had been secretary and advisor to the late Rana Saheb of Porbandar before he was installed on his gadi, and hanging over his head at this time was the charge of having given wrong advice when in that office. The matter had gone to the political agent who was prejudiced against my brother. Now I had known this officer when in England, and he may be said to have been fairly friendly to me. My brother thought that I should avail myself of the friendship and, putting in a good word on his behalf, try to disabuse the political agent of his prejudice. I did not at all like this idea. I should not, I thought, try to take advantage of a trifling acquaintance in England. If my brother was really at fault, what use was my recommendation? If he was innocent, he should submit a petition in the proper course and, confident of his innocence, face the result. My brother did not relish this advice. You do not know Kathiawad, he said, and you have yet to know the world. Only influence counts here. It is not proper for you, a brother, to shirk your duty, when you can clearly put in a good word about me to an officer you know. I could not refuse him, so I went to the officer much against my will. I knew I had no right to approach him and was fully conscious that I was compromising my self-respect. But I sought an appointment and got it. I reminded him of the old acquaintance, but I immediately saw that Kathiawad was different from England, that an officer on leave was not the same as an officer on duty. The political agent owned the acquaintance, but the reminder seemed to stiffen him. Surely, you have not come here to abuse that acquaintance, have you? Appeared to be the meaning of that stiffness, and seemed to be written on his brow. Nevertheless, I opened my case. The Sahib was impatient. Your brother is an intriguer. I want to hear nothing more from you. I have no time. If your brother has anything to say, let him apply through the proper channel. The answer was enough, was perhaps deserved. But selfishness is blind. I went on with my story. The Sahib got up and said, you must go now. But please hear me out, said I. That made him more angry. He called his peon and ordered him to show me the door. I was still hesitating when the peon came in, placed his hands on my shoulders and put me out of the room. The Sahib went away as also the peon, and I departed, fretting and fuming. I at once wrote out and sent over a note to this effect: you have insulted me. You have assaulted me through your peon. If you make no amends, I shall have to proceed against you. Quick came the answer through his sewer. You were rude to me. I asked you to go and you would not. I had no option but to order my peon to show you the door. Even after he asked you to leave the office, you did not do so. He therefore had to use just enough force to send you out. You are at liberty to proceed as you wish. With this answer in my pocket, I came home crestfallen, and told my brother all that had happened. He was grieved, but was at a loss as to how to console me. He spoke to his vakil friends, for I did not know how to proceed against the Sahib. Sir Farazesha Mehta happened to be in Rajkot at this time, having come down from Bombay for some case. But how could a junior barrister like me dare to see him? So I sent him the papers of my case, through the vakil who had engaged him, and begged for his advice. Tell Gandhi, he said, such things are the common experience of many vakils and barristers. He is still fresh from England, and hot-blooded. He does not know British officers. If he would earn something and have an easy time here, let him tear up the note and pocket the insult. He will gain nothing by proceeding against the Sahib, and on the contrary will very likely ruin himself. Tell him he has yet to know life. The advice was as bitter as poison to me, but I had to swallow it. I pocketed the insult, but also profited by it. Never again shall I place myself in such a false position, never again shall I try to exploit friendship in this way, said I to myself, and since then I have been guilty of a breach of that determination. This shock changed the course of my life. Chapter 30. Preparing for South Africa. I was no doubt at fault in having gone to that officer. But his impatience and overbearing anger were out of all proportion to my mistake. It did not warrant expulsion. I can scarcely have taken up more than 5 minutes of his time. But he simply could not endure my talking. He could have politely asked me to go, but power had intoxicated him to an inordinate extent. Later I came to know that patience was not one of the virtues of this officer. It was usual for him to insult his visitors. The slightest unpleasantness was sure to put the Sahib out. Now most of my work would naturally be in his court. It was beyond me to conciliate him. I had no desire to curry favor with him. Indeed, having once threatened to proceed against him, I did not like to remain silent. Meanwhile I began to learn something of the petty politics of the country. Kathiawad, being a conglomeration of small states, naturally had its rich crop of politicals. Petty intrigues between states, and intrigues of officers for power were the order of the day. Princes were always at the mercy of others and ready to lend their ears to sycophants. Even the Sahib's peon had to be cajoled, and the Sahib's Shirastadar was more than his master, as he was his eyes, his ears and his interpreter. The Shirastadar's will was law, and his income was always reputed to be more than the Sahib's. This may have been an exaggeration, but he certainly lived beyond his salary. This atmosphere appeared to me to be poisonous, and how to remain unscathed was a perpetual problem for me. I was thoroughly depressed and my brother clearly saw it. We both felt that, if I could secure some job, I should be free from this atmosphere of intrigue. But without intrigue a ministership or judgeship was out of the question. And the quarrel with the Sahib stood in the way of my practice. Probandar was then under administration, and I had some work there in the shape of securing more powers for the prince. Also I had to see the administrator in respect of the heavy vigoti, land rent, exacted from the Mirs. This officer, though an Indian, was, I found, one better than the Sahib in arrogance. He was able, but the riots appeared to me to be none the better off for his ability. I succeeded in securing a few more powers for the Rana, but hardly any relief for the Mirs. It struck me that their cause was not even carefully gone into. So even in this mission I was comparatively disappointed. I thought justice was not done to my clients, but I had not the means to secure it. At the most I could have appealed to the political agent or to the governor, who would have dismissed the appeal saying, "We decline to interfere." If there had been any rule or regulation governing such decisions, it would have been something. But here the Sahib's will was law. I was exasperated. In the meantime a Memon firm from Porbandar wrote to my brother making the following offer. "We have business in South Africa. Ours is a big firm, and we have a big case there in the court. Our claim being £40,000. It has been going on for a long time. We have engaged the services of the best vakils and barristers. If you sent your brother there, he would be useful to us and also to himself. He would be able to instruct our counsel better than ourselves. And he would have the advantage of seeing a new part of the world, and of making new acquaintances." My brother discussed the proposition with me. I could not clearly make out whether I had simply to instruct the counsel or to appear in court. But I was tempted. My brother introduced me to the late Sheikh Abdul Karim Javeri, a partner of Dada Abdullah & Co., the firm in question. "It won't be a difficult job," the Sheikh assured me. "We have big Europeans as our friends, whose acquaintance you will make. You can be useful to us. Our shop, much of our correspondence is in English, and you can help us with that too. You will, of course, be our guest, and hence will have no expense whatever." "How long do you require my services?" I asked. "And what will be the payment?" "Not more than a year. We will pay you a first-class return fare and a sum of £105, all found." This was hardly going there as a barrister. It was going as a servant of the firm. But I wanted somehow to leave India. There was also the tempting opportunity of seeing a new country, and of having new experience. Also I could send £105 to my brother and help in the expenses of the household. I closed with the offer without any higgling, and got ready to go to South Africa. Chapter 31. Arrival in Natal. When starting for South Africa I did not feel the wrench of separation which I had experienced when leaving for England. My mother was now no more. I had gained some knowledge of the world and of travel abroad, and going from Rajkot to Bombay was no unusual affair. This time I only felt the pang of parting with my wife. Another baby had been born to us since my return from England. Our love could not yet be called free from lust, but it was getting gradually purer. Since my return from Europe, we had lived very little together, and as I had now become her teacher, however indifferent, and helped her to make certain reforms, we both felt the necessity of being more together, if only to continue the reforms. But the attraction of South Africa rendered the separation bearable. "We are bound to meet again in a year," I said to her, by way of consolation, and left Rajkot for Bombay. Here I was to get my passage through the agent of Dada Abdullah and Company. But no berth was available on the boat, and if I did not sail then, I should be stranded in Bombay. "We have tried our best," said the agent, "to secure a first-class passage, but in vain unless you are prepared to go on deck. Your meals can be arranged for in the saloon." Those were the days of my first-class traveling, and how could a barrister travel as a deck passenger? So I refused the offer. I suspected the agent's veracity, for I could not believe that a first-class passage was not available. With the agent's consent, I set about securing it myself. I went on board the boat and met the chief officer. He said to me quite frankly, "We do not usually have such a rush. But as the Governor-General of Mozambique is going by this boat, all the berths are engaged. Could you not possibly squeeze me in?" I asked. He surveyed me from top to toe and smiled. "There is just one way," he said. "There is an extra berth in my cabin, which is usually not available for passengers. But I am prepared to give it to you." I thanked him and got the agent to purchase the passage. In April 1893 I set forth full of zest to try my luck in South Africa. The first port of call was Lamu, which we reached in about 13 days. The captain and I had become great friends by this time. He was fond of playing chess, but as he was quite a novice, he wanted one still more of a beginner for his partner, and so he invited me. I had heard a lot about the game but had never tried my hand at it. Players used to say that this was a game in which there was plenty of scope for the exercise of one's intelligence. The captain offered to give me lessons, and he found me a good pupil as I had unlimited patience. Every time I was the loser, and that made him all the more eager to teach me. I liked the game, but never carried my liking beyond the boat or my knowledge beyond the moves of the pieces. At Lamu the ship remained at anchor for some 3 to 4 hours, and I landed to see the port. The captain had also gone ashore, but he had warned me that the harbor was treacherous and that I should return in good time. It was a very small place. I went to the post office and was delighted to see the Indian clerks there, and had a talk with them. I also saw the Africans and tried to acquaint myself with their ways of life, which interested me very much. This took up some time. There were some deck passengers with whom I had made acquaintance, and who had landed with a view to cooking their food on shore and having a quiet meal. I now found them preparing to return to the steamer, so we all got into the same boat. The tide was high in the harbor and our boat had more than its proper load. The current was so strong that it was impossible to hold the boat to the ladder of the steamer. It would just touch the ladder and be drawn away again by the current. The first whistle to start had already gone. I was worried. The captain was witnessing our plight from the bridge. He ordered the steamer to wait an extra 5 minutes. There was another boat near the ship which a friend hired for me for 10 rupees. This boat picked me up from the overloaded one. The ladder had already been raised. I had therefore to be drawn up by means of a rope, and the steamer started immediately. The other passengers were left behind. I now appreciated the captain's warning. After Lamu the next port was Mombasa and then Zanzibar. The halt here was a long one, 8 or 10 days, and we then changed to another boat. The captain liked me much, but the liking took an undesirable turn. He invited an English friend and me to accompany him on an outing, and we all what the outing meant. And little did the captain know what an ignoramus I was in such matters. We were taken to some Negro women's quarters by a tout. We were each shown into a room. I simply stood there dumb with shame. Heaven only knows what the poor woman must have thought of me. He saw my innocence. At first I felt very much ashamed, but as I could not think of the thing except with horror, the sense of shame wore away, and I thanked God that the sight of the woman had no moved me in the least. I was disgusted at my weakness and pitied myself for not having had the courage to refuse to go into the room. This in my life was the third trial of its kind. Many a youth, innocent at first, must have been drawn into sin by a false sense of shame. I could have credit if I had refused to enter that room. I must entirely thank the All-Merciful for having saved me. The incident increased my faith in God and taught me, to a certain extent, to cast off false shame. As we had to remain in this port for a week, I took rooms in the town and saw a good deal by wandering about the neighborhood. Only Malabar can give any idea of the luxuriant vegetation of Zanzibar. I was amazed at the gigantic trees and the size of the fruits. The next call was at Mozambique, and thence we reached Natal towards the close of May. Chapter 32. Some experiences. The port of Natal is Durban, also known as Port Natal. Abdullah Sheth was there to receive me. As the ship arrived at the quay and I watched the people coming on board to meet their friends, I observed that the Indians were not held in much respect. I could not fail to notice a sort of snobbishness about the manner in which those who knew Abdullah Sheth behaved towards him, and it stung me. Abdullah Sheth had not got used to it. Those who looked at me did so with a certain amount of curiosity. My dress marked me out from other Indians. I had a frock coat and a turban, an imitation of the Bengal puggree. I was taken to the firm's quarters and shown into the room set apart for me, next to Abdullah Sheth's. He did not understand me. I could not understand him. He read the papers his brother had sent through me, and felt more puzzled. He thought his brother had sent him a white elephant. My style of dress and living struck him as being expensive like that of the Europeans. There was no particular work then which could be given me. Their case was going on in the Transvaal. There was no meaning in sending me there immediately. And how far could he trust my ability and honesty? He would not be in Pretoria to watch me. The defendants were in Pretoria, and for aught he knew they might bring undue influence to bear on me. And if work in connection with the case in question was not to be entrusted to me, what work could I be given to do, as all other work could be done much better by his clerks? The clerks could be brought to book if they did wrong. Could I be, if I also happened to err? So if no work in connection with the case could be given me, I should have to be kept for nothing. Abdullah Sheth was practically unlettered, but he had a rich fund of experience. He had an acute intellect and was conscious of it. By practice he had picked up just sufficient English for conversational purposes, but that served him for carrying on all his business, whether it was dealing with bank managers and European merchants or explaining his case to his counsel. The Indians held him in very high esteem. His firm was then the biggest, or at any rate one of the biggest, of the Indian firms. With all these advantages he had one disadvantage: he was by nature suspicious. He was proud of Islam and loved to discourse on Islamic philosophy. Though he did not know Arabic, his acquaintance with the Holy Quran and Islamic literature in general was fairly good. Illustrations he had in plenty, always ready at hand. Contact with him gave me a fair amount of practical knowledge of Islam. When we came closer to each other, we had long discussions on religious topics. On the second or third day of my arrival, he took me to see the Durban court. There he introduced me to several people and seated me next to his attorney. The magistrate kept staring at me and finally asked me to take off my turban. This I refused to do and left the court. So here too there was fighting in store for me. Abdullah Sheth explained to me why some Indians were required to take off their turbans. Those wearing the Musalman costume might, he said, keep their turbans on, but the other Indians on entering a court had to take theirs off as a rule. I must enter into some details to make this nice distinction intelligible. In the course of these 2 or 3 days I could see that the Indians were divided into different groups. One was that of Musalman merchants, who would call themselves Arabs. Another was that of Hindu, and yet another of Parsi clerks. The Hindu clerks were neither here nor there, unless they cast in their lot with the Arab. The Parsi clerks would call themselves Persians. These 3 classes had some social relations with one another. But by far the largest class was that composed of Tamil, Telugu, and North Indian indentured and freed laborers. The indentured laborers were those who went to Natal on an agreement to serve for 5 years, and came to be known there as Germatias from Gurmat, which was the corrupt form of the English word agreement. The other 3 classes had none but business relations with this class. Englishmen called them coolies, and as the majority of Indians belonged to the laboring class, all Indians were called coolies, or Samis. Sami is a Tamil suffix occurring after many Tamil names, and it is nothing else than the Sanskrit Swami, meaning a master. Whenever, therefore, an Indian resented being addressed as a Sami and had enough wit in him, he would try to return the compliment in this wise: you may call me Sami, but you forget that Sami means a master. I am not your master. Some Englishmen would wince at this, while others would get angry, swear at the Indian and, if there was a chance, would even belabor him, for Sami to him was nothing better than a term of contempt. To interpret it to mean a master amounted to an insult. I was hence known as a coolie barrister. The merchants were known as coolie merchants. The original meaning of the word coolie was thus forgotten, and it became a common appellation for all Indians. The Musalman merchant would resent this and say, I am not a coolie, I am an Arab. Or, I am a merchant, and the Englishman, if courteous, would apologize to him. The question of wearing the turban had a great importance in this state of things. Being obliged to take off one's Indian turban would be pocketing an insult. So I thought I had better bid goodbye to the Indian turban and begin wearing an English hat, which would save me from the insult and the unpleasant controversy. But Abdullah Sheth disapproved of the idea. He said, if you do anything of the kind, it will have a very bad effect. You will compromise those insisting on wearing Indian turbans. And an Indian turban sits well on your head. If you wear an English hat, you will pass for a waiter. There was practical wisdom, patriotism, and a little bit of narrowness in this advice. The wisdom was apparent, and he would not have insisted on the Indian turban except out of patriotism. The slighting reference to the waiter betrayed a kind of narrowness. Amongst the indentured Indians, there were three classes: Hindus, Musulmans, and Christians. The last were the children of indentured Indians who became converts to Christianity. Even in 1893 their number was large. They wore the English costume, and the majority of them earned their living by service as waiters in hotels. Abdullah Sheth's criticism of the English hat was with reference to this class. It was considered degrading to serve as a waiter in a hotel. The belief persists even today among many. On the whole, I liked Abdullah Sheth's advice. I wrote to the press about the incident and defended the wearing of my turban in the court. The question was very much discussed in the papers, which described me as an unwelcome visitor. Thus the incident gave me an unexpected advertisement in South Africa within a few days of my arrival there. Some supported me while others severely criticized my temerity. My turban stayed with me practically until the end of my stay in South Africa. When and why I left off wearing any headdress at all in South Africa, we shall see later. Chapter 33. On the way to Pretoria, I soon came in contact with the Christian Indians living in Durban. The court interpreter, Mr. Paul, was a Roman Catholic. I made his acquaintance, as also that of the late Mr. Subhan Godfrey, then a teacher under the Protestant mission, and father of James Godfrey, who as a member of the South African deputation, visited India in 1924. I likewise met the late Parsi Rustamji and the late Adamji Mayakan about the same time. All these friends, who up to then had never met one another except on business, came ultimately into close contact, as we shall see later. Whilst I was thus widening the circle of my acquaintance, the firm received a letter from their lawyer saying that preparations should be made for the case, and that Abdullah Sheth should go to Pretoria himself or send representative. Abdullah Sheth gave me this letter to read, and asked me if I would go to Pretoria. I can only say, after I have understood the case from you, said I, at present I am at a loss to know what I have to do there. He thereupon asked his clerks to explain the case to me. As I began to study the case, I felt as though I ought to begin from the ABC of the subject. During the few days I had had at Zanzibar, I had been to the court to see the work there. A Parsi lawyer was examining a witness and asking him question regarding credit and debit entries in account books. It was all Greek to me. Bookkeeping I had learnt neither at school nor during my stay in England. And the case for which I had come to South Africa was mainly about accounts. Only one who knew accounts could understand and explain it. The clerk went on talking about this debited and that credited, and I felt more and more confused. I did not know what a P note meant. I failed to find the word in the dictionary. I revealed my ignorance to the clerk, and I learnt from him that a P note meant a promissory note. I purchased a book on bookkeeping and studied it. That gave me some confidence. I understood the case. I saw that Abdullah Sheth, who did not know how to keep accounts, had so much practical knowledge that he could quickly solve intricacies of bookkeeping. I told him that I was prepared to go to Pretoria. Where will you put up? Asked the Sheth. Wherever you want me to, said I. Then I shall write to our lawyer. He will arrange for your lodgings. I shall also write to my Memon friends there, but I would not advise you to stay with them. The other party has great influence in Pretoria. Should any one of them manage to read our private correspondence, it might do us much harm. The more you avoid familiarity with them, the better for us. I shall stay where your lawyer puts me up, or I shall find out independent lodgings. Pray don't worry. Not a soul shall know anything that is confidential between us. But I do intend cultivating the acquaintance of the other party. I should like to be friends with them. I would try, if possible, to settle the case out of court. After all, Tayyib Sheth is a relative of yours. Sheth Tayyib Haji Khan Muhammad was a near relative of Abdullah Sheth. The mention of a probable settlement somewhat startled the Sheth, I could see. But I had already been 6 or 7 days in Durban, and we now knew and understood each other. I was no longer a white elephant. So he said, why, yes, I see. There would be nothing better than a settlement out of court. But we are all relatives, and know one another very well indeed. Tayyib Sheth is not a man to consent to a settlement easily. With the slightest unwariness on our part, he would screw all sorts of things out of us, and do us down in the end. So please think twice before you do nothing. Don't be anxious about that, said I. I need not talk to Tayyib Sheth, or for that matter to anyone else, about the case. I would only suggest to him to come to an understanding, and so save a lot of unnecessary litigation. On the 7th or 8th day after my arrival, I left Durban. A first-class seat was booked for me. It was usual there to pay 5 shillings extra, if one needed a bedding. Abdullah Sheikh insisted that I should book one bedding, but, out of obstinacy and pride and with a view to saving 5 shillings, I declined. Abdullah Sheikh warned me. "Look, now," said he, "this is a different country from India. Thank God, we have enough and to spare. Please do not stint yourself in anything that you may need." I thanked him and asked him not to be anxious. The train reached Maritzburg, the capital of Natal, at about 9 p.m. Beddings used to be provided. At this station, a railway servant came and asked me if I wanted one. "No," said I have one with me." He went away. But a passenger came next, and looked me up and down. He saw that I was a colored man. This disturbed him. Out he went and came in again with 1 or 2 officials. They all kept quiet, when another official came to me and said, "Come along, you must go to the phone compartment." "But I have a first-class ticket," said I. "That doesn't matter," rejoined the other. "I tell you, you must go to the van compartment. I tell you, I was permitted to travel in this compartment at Durban, and I insist on going on in it." "No, you won't," said the official. "You must leave this compartment, or else I shall have to call a police constable to push you out." "Yes, you may." I refused to get out voluntarily. The constable came. He took me by the hand and pushed me out. My luggage was also taken out. I refused to go to the other compartment and the train steamed away. I went and sat in the waiting room, keeping my handbag with me, and leaving the other luggage where it was. The railway authorities had taken charge of it. It was winter, and winter in the higher regions of South Africa is severely cold. Maritzburg being at a high altitude, the cold was extremely bitter. My overcoat was in my luggage, but I did not dare to ask for it lest I should be insulted again, so I sat and shivered. There was no light in the room. A passenger came in at about midnight and possibly wanted to talk to me. But I was in no mood to talk. I began to think of my duty. Should I fight for my rights or go back to India, or should I go on to Pretoria without minding the insults, and return to India after finishing the case? It would be cowardice to run back to India without fulfilling my obligation. The hardship to which I was subjected was superficial, only a symptom of the deep disease of color prejudice. I should try, if possible, to root out the disease and suffer hardships in the process. Redress for wrongs I should seek only to the extent that would be necessary for the removal of the color prejudice. So I decided to take the next available train to Pretoria. The following morning I sent a long telegram to the general manager of the railway and also informed Abdullah Sheikh, who immediately met the general manager. The manager justified the conduct of the railway authorities, but informed him that he had already instructed the station master to see that I reached my destination safely. Abdullah Sheikh wired to the Indian merchants in Maritzburg and to friends in other places to meet me and look after me. The merchants came to see me at the station and tried to comfort me by narrating their own hardships and explaining that what had happened to me was nothing unusual. They also said that Indians traveling first or second class had to expect trouble from railway officials and white passengers. The day was thus spent in listening to these tales of woe. The evening train arrived. There was a reserved berth for me. I now purchased at Maritzburg the bedding ticket I had refused to book at Durban. The train took me to Charlestown. Chapter 34. More hardships. The train reached Charlestown in the morning. There was no railway, in those days, between Charlestown and Johannesburg, but only a stage coach, which halted at Standerton for the night. En route. I possessed a ticket for the coach, which was not cancelled by the break of the journey. At Maritzburg for a day. Besides, Abdullah Sheikh had sent a wire to the coach agent at Charlestown. But the agent only needed a pretext for putting me off, and so, when he discovered me to be a stranger, he said, "Your ticket is cancelled." I gave him the proper reply. The reason at the back of his mind was not one of accommodation, but quite another. Passengers had to be accommodated inside the coach, but as I was regarded as a coolie and looked a stranger, it would be proper, thought the leader, as the white man in charge of the coach was called, not to seat me with the white passengers. There were seats on either side of the coach box. The leader sat on one of these as a rule. Today he sat inside and gave me his seat. I knew it was sheer injustice and an insult, but I thought it better to pocket it. I could not have forced myself inside. And if I had raised a protest, the coach would have gone off without me. This would have meant the loss of another day, and heaven only knows what would have happened the next day. So, much as I fretted within myself, I prudently sat next the coachman. At about 3 o'clock the coach reached Partikov. Now the leader desired to sit where I was seated, as he wanted to smoke and possibly to have some fresh air. So he took a piece of dirty sackcloth from the driver, spread it on the footboard and, addressing me said, "Sammy, you sit on this, I want to sit near the driver, duh." The insult was more than I could bear. In fear and trembling I said to him, "It was you who seated me here, though I should have been accommodated inside." I put up with the insult. "Now that you want to sit outside and smoke, you would have me sit at your feet. I will not do so, but I am prepared to sit inside." As I was struggling through these sentences, the man came down upon me and began heavily to box my ears. He seized me by the arm and tried to drag me down. I clung to the brass rails of the coach box and was determined to keep my hold even at the risk of breaking my wrist bones. The passengers were witnessing the scene, the man swearing at me, dragging and belaboring me, and I remaining still. He was strong and I was weak. Some of the passengers were moved to pity, and exclaimed, "Man, let him alone. Don't beat him. He is not to blame. He is right. If he can't stay there, let him come and sit with us." "No fear," cried the man, but he seemed somewhat crestfallen, and stopped beating me. He let go my arm, swore at me a little more, and asking the Hottentot servant who was sitting on the other side of the coach box to sit on the footboard, took the seat so vacated. The passengers took their seats and, the whistle given, the coach rattled away. My heart was beating fast within my breast, and I was wondering whether I should ever reach my destination alive. The man cast an angry look at me now and then and, pointing his finger at me, growled, "Take care, let me once get to Standerton and I shall show you what I do." I sat speechless and prayed to God to help me. After dark we reached Standerton and I heaved a sigh of relief on seeing some Indian faces. As soon as I got down, these friends said, "We are here to receive you and take you to Isa Chef's shop. We have had a telegram from Dada Abdullah." I was very glad, and we went to Sheikh Isa Haji Sumar's shop. The Sheikh and his clerks gathered round me. I told them all that I had gone through. They were very sorry to hear it and comforted me by relating to me their own bitter experiences. I wanted to inform the agent of the coach company of the whole affair. So I wrote him a letter, narrating everything that had happened, and drawing his attention to the threat his man had held out. I also asked for an assurance that he would accommodate me with the other passengers inside the coach when we started the next morning. To which the agent replied to this effect: "From Standerton we have a bigger coach with different men in charge. The man complained of will not be there tomorrow, and you will have a seat with the other passengers." This somewhat relieved me. I had, of course, no intention of proceeding against the man who had assaulted me, and so the chapter of the assault closed there. In the morning Isa Chef's man took me to the coach. I got a good seat and reached Johannesburg quite safely that night. Standerton is a small village and Johannesburg a big city. Abdullah Sheikh had wired to Johannesburg also, and given me the name and address of Mohammed Kazim Kamruddin's firm. Their man had come to receive me at the stage, but neither did I see him nor did he recognize me. So I decided to go to a hotel. I knew the names of several. Taking a cab I asked to be driven to the Grand National Hotel. I saw the manager and asked for a room. He eyed me for a moment, and politely saying, "I am very sorry, we are full up," bade me goodbye. So I asked the cabman to drive to Mohammed Kazim Kamruddin's shop. Here I found Abdul Ghani Sheikh expecting me, and he gave me a cordial greeting. He had a hearty laugh over the story of my experience at the hotel. "However did you expect to be admitted to a hotel?" he said. "Why not?" I asked. "You will come to know after you have stayed here a few days," said he. "Only we can live in a land like this, because, for making money, we do not mind pocketing insults, and here we are." With this he narrated to me the story of the hardships of Indians in South Africa. Of Sheikh Abdul Ghani we shall know more as we proceed. He said, "This country is not for men like you. Look now, you have to go to Pretoria tomorrow. You will have to travel third class. Conditions in the Transvaal are worse than in Natal. First and second class tickets are never issued to Indians. You cannot have made persistent efforts in this direction. We have sent representations, but I confess our own men too do not want as a rule to travel first or second. I sent for the railway regulations and read them. There was a loophole. The language of the old Transvaal enactments was not very exact or precise, that of the railway regulations was even less. So I said to the Sheikh, I wish to go first class, and if I cannot, I shall prefer to take a cab to Pretoria, a matter of only 37 miles. Sheikh Abdul Ghani drew my attention to the extra time and money this would mean, but agreed to my proposal to travel first, and accordingly we sent a note to the station master. I mentioned in my note that I was a barrister and that I always traveled first. I also stated in the letter that I needed to reach Pretoria as early as possible, that as there was no time to await his reply I would receive it in person at the station, and that I should expect to get a first-class ticket. There was of course a purpose behind asking for the reply in person. I thought that if the station master gave a written reply, he would certainly say no, especially because he would have his own notion of a collie barrister. I would therefore appear before him in faultless English dress, talk to him and possibly persuade him to issue a first-class ticket. So I went to the station in a frock coat and necktie, placed a sovereign for my fare on the counter and asked for a first-class ticket. "You sent me that note?" he asked. "That is so. I shall be much obliged if you will give me a ticket. I must reach Pretoria today." He smiled and, moved to pity, said, "I am not a Transvaaler. I am a Hollander. I appreciate your feelings, and you have my sympathy. I do want to give you a ticket on one condition, however. That, if the guard should ask you to shift to the third class, you will not involve me in the affair, by which I mean that you should not proceed against the railway company. I wish you a safe journey. I can see you are a gentleman." With these words he booked the ticket. I thanked him and gave him the necessary assurance. Sheikh Abdul Ghani had come to see me off at the station. The incident gave him an agreeable surprise, but he warned me saying, "I shall be thankful if you reach Pretoria all right. I am afraid the guard will not leave you in peace in the first class, and even if he does, the passengers will not." I took my seat in a first-class compartment and the train started. At Germiston the guard came to examine the tickets. He was angry to find me there, and signaled to me with his finger to go to the third class. I showed him my first-class ticket. "That doesn't matter," said he, "remove to the third class." There was only one English passenger in the compartment. He took the guard to ask, "Don't you see he has a first-class ticket? I do not mind in the least his traveling with me." Addressing me, he said, "You should make yourself comfortable where you are." The guard muttered, "If you want to travel with a coolie, what do I care," and went away. At about 8 o'clock in the evening the train reached Pretoria. Chapter 35. First day in Pretoria. I had expected someone on behalf of Dada Abdullah's attorney to meet me at Pretoria station. I knew that no Indian would be there to receive me, since I had particularly promised not to put up at an Indian house. But the attorney had sent no one. I understood later that, as I had arrived on a Sunday, he could not have sent anyone without inconvenience. I was perplexed, and wondered where to go, as I feared that no hotel would accept me. Pretoria station in 1893 was quite different from what it was in 1914. The lights were burning dimly. The travelers were few. I let all the other passengers go and thought that, as soon as the ticket collector was fairly free, I would hand him my ticket and ask him if he could direct me to some small hotel or any other such place where I might go, otherwise I would spend the night at the station. I must confess I shrank from asking him even this, for I was afraid of being insulted. The station became clear of all passengers. I gave my ticket to the ticket collector and began my inquiries. He replied to me courteously, but I saw that he could not be of any considerable help. But an American Negro who was standing nearby broke into the conversation. "I see," said he, "that you are an utter stranger here, without any friends. If you will come with me, I will take you to a small hotel, of which the proprietor is an American who is very well known to me. I think he will accept you." I had my own doubts about the offer, but I thanked him and accepted his suggestion. He took me to Johnson's family hotel. He drew Mr. Johnson aside to speak to him, and the latter agreed to accommodate me for the night, on condition that I should have my dinner served in my room. "I assure you," said he, "that I have no color prejudice. But I have only European custom, and, if I allowed you to eat in the dining room, my guests might be offended and even go away." "Thank you," said I, "even for accommodating me for the night. I am now more or less acquainted with the conditions here, and I understand your difficulty. I do not mind your serving the dinner in my room. I hope to be able to make some other arrangement tomorrow." I was shown into a room, where I now sat waiting for the dinner and musing, as I was quite alone. There were not many guests in the hotel, and I had expected the waiter to come very shortly with the dinner. Instead, Mr. Johnston appeared. He said, "I was ashamed of having asked you to have your dinner here. So I spoke to the other guests about you, and asked them if they would mind your having your dinner in the dining room. They said they had no objection, and that they did not mind your staying here as long as you liked. Please, therefore, come to the dining room, if you will, and stay here as long as you wish." I thanked him again, went to the dining room and had a hearty dinner. Next morning I called on the attorney, Mr. A. W. Baker. Abdullah Sheth had given me some description of him, so his cordial reception did not surprise me. He received me very warmly and made kind inquiries. I explained all about myself. Thereupon he said, "We have no work for you here as barrister, for we have engaged the best counsel. The case is a prolonged and complicated one, so I shall take your assistance only to the extent of getting necessary information. And of course you will make communication with my client easy for me, as I shall now ask for all the information I want from him through you. That is certainly an advantage. I have not yet found rooms for you. I thought I had better do so after having seen you. There is a fearful amount of color prejudice here, and therefore it is not easy to find lodgings for such as you. But I know a poor woman. She is the wife of a baker. I think she will take you and thus add to her income at the same time. Come, let us go to her place." So he took me to her house. He spoke with her privately about me, and she agreed to accept me as a boarder at 35 shillings a week. Mr. Baker, besides being an attorney, was a staunch lay preacher. He is still alive and now engaged purely in missionary work, having given up the legal profession. He is quite well to do. He still corresponds with me. In his letters he always dwells on the same theme. He upholds the excellence of Christianity from various points of view, and contends that it is impossible to find eternal peace unless one accepts Jesus as the only Son of God and the Savior of mankind. During the very first interview Mr. Baker ascertained my religious views. I said to him, "I am a Hindu by birth. And yet I do not know much of Hinduism, and I know less of other religions. In fact, I do not know where I am, and what should be my belief. I intend to make a careful study of my own religion and, as far as I can, of other religions as well." Mr. Baker was glad to hear all this, and said, "I am one of the directors of the South Africa General Mission. I have built a church at my own expense, and deliver sermons in it regularly. I am free from color prejudice. I have some co-workers, and we meet at 1 o'clock every day for a few minutes and pray for peace and light. I shall be glad if you will join us there. I shall introduce you to my co-workers who will be happy to meet you, and I dare say you will also like their company. I shall give you, besides some religious books to read, though of course the book of books is the Holy Bible, which I would specially recommend to you." I thanked Mr. Baker and agreed to attend the 1 o'clock prayers as regularly as possible. "So I shall expect you here tomorrow at 1 o'clock, and we shall go together to pray," added Mr. Baker, and we said goodbye. I had little time for reflection just yet. I went to Mr. Johnston, paid the bill and removed to the new lodgings, where I had my lunch. The landlady was good woman. She had cooked a vegetarian meal for me. It was not long before I made myself quite at home with the family. I next went to see the friend to whom Dada Abdullah had given me a note. From him I learnt more about the hardships of Indians in South Africa. He insisted that I should stay with him. I thanked him, and told him that I had already made arrangements. He urged me not to hesitate to ask for anything I needed. It was now dark. I returned home, had my dinner, went to my room and lay there absorbed in deep thought. There was not any immediate work for me. I informed Abdullah Sheth of it. What, I thought, can be meaning of Mr. Baker's interest in me? What shall I gain from his religious co-workers? How far should I undertake the study of Christianity? How was I to obtain literature about Hinduism? And how was I to understand Christianity in its proper perspective without thoroughly knowing my own religion? I could come to only one conclusion: I should make a dispassionate study of all that came to me, and deal with Mr. Baker's group as God might guide me. I should not think of embracing another religion before I had fully understood my own. Thus musing I fell asleep. Chapter 36. Christian Contacts. The next day at 1 o'clock I went to Mr. Baker's prayer meeting. There I was introduced to Miss Harris, Miss Gabb, Mr. Coates, and others. Everyone kneeled down to pray, and I followed suit. The prayers were supplications to God for various things, according to each person's desire. Thus the usual forms were for the day to be passed peacefully, or for God to open the doors of the heart. A prayer was now added for my welfare: Lord, show the path to the new brother who has come amongst us, give him, Lord, the peace that thou hast given us. May the Lord Jesus who has saved us save him too. We ask all this in the name of Jesus. There was no singing of hymns or other music at these meetings. After the supplication for something special every day, we dispersed, each going to his lunch, that being the hour for it. The prayers did not take more than 5 minutes. The Mrs. Harris and Gabb were both elderly maiden ladies. Mr. Coates was a Quaker. The two Ladies lived together, and they gave me a standing invitation to 4 o'clock tea at their house. Every Sunday. When we met on Sundays, I used to give Mr. Coates my religious diary for the week, and discuss with him the books I had read and the impression they had left on me. The ladies used to narrate their sweet experiences and talk about the peace they had found. Mr. Coates was a frank-hearted, staunch young man. We went out for walks together, and he also took me to other Christian friends.